Hi, friends. This is Joe. I have just a few notes before we get started. The first thing I want to say is that this is an interview episode. I'm interviewing Chris Gonnerman. He's the author and the driving force behind the Basic Fantasy RPG and the Iron Falcon RPG. We never say exactly what those are. It's sort of assumed that you'll know, but I was like, oh, maybe I should tell you. Basic Fantasy is a free OSR style RPG, free to download. If you want a printed copy, very affordable. I think it's less than $9 on Amazon. And Iron Falcon is a free retro clone of the original white box with the Greyhawk supplement. Again, free to download. Buy it on Amazon for under $11, I think. Great deals. I mean, I own both printed copies. I recommend them highly. So that's what they are. The second note I had was that if you want to download these things or just check out the community, it's basicfantasy.org. We say that at the end of the episode, but I just wanted to put it up front in case you don't get to the end. It's also in the show notes, but basicfantasy.org. The third note is that this is a long episode. This went an hour long. I thought about splitting it into 2 episodes, but I figured that would make Jason sad. So if you don't like long episodes, I apologize. If, on the other hand, you don't like split up episodes, you're welcome. The last note I have is that there is no video for this episode. The last couple episodes and all the future episodes are going to have video as I'm doing the joint YouTube podcast thing. But this was my first interview since I've started that, and I don't quite yet have a technology how I'm going to do the remote video recording and my side. So if you're looking forward to a video, I apologize. I am working on a solution for future recordings. With all that said, let's get started.
Welcome to the Decahedron RPG podcast, hosted by Joe. Welcome to the Decahedron RPG podcast. Enjoy the show.
Hi, friends. This is Joe. This is episode, 128, 129, depending when I decide to put it out, of the Decahedron RPG podcast. Today, I'm joined by an incredibly special guest, Mr. Chris Gonnerman. Chris is the author of the Basic Fantasy RPG and the Iron Falcon RPG, and probably other stuff I don't know. Hello, Chris.
Hello. How are you today?
I'm amazing. I'm kind of hyped. I have a
hyped.
guest.
People keep telling me I'm special. I'm concerned about what that might mean.
Yeah, there are so many things it could mean, but I think it's a good thing.
Okay.
All right. So the way this whole guest appearance show came about is that Google put all my episodes on YouTube, and amongst them was episode 8, which was the very first review that we ever did. And James was with me on that episode, and we reviewed Basic Fantasy Equipment Emporium, which we both gave thumbs up to. It's a great book. I love it. And but you took a little bit of exception, and that might be a strong word to use, to something I said there. But what I said was that Basic Fantasy kind of takes kind of the 3E rules and strips out a whole bunch and makes them old school and feel without trying to emulate any particular version. You said that's not quite right. So I thought the first thing we should do is to let you say in your own words what I should have said.
Well, basically, I think you've probably taken the view from what I wrote back in 2006 when everyone told me I was going to get sued. And it was kind of necessary to overstate the case of just exactly how much dependent it was on the SRD. In fact, the rules themselves depend on almost nothing from the SRD. I did borrow flavor text in a lot of places because I wanted to be able to show that connection if anybody questioned me on it. At the time that Basic Fantasy was being written, the only thing that was actually published under the OGL that used the work the way that Basic Fantasy did was Castles and Crusades, and they didn't go nearly as far as I was going. And even there, they felt concerned enough that they renamed some things and so forth to emphasize their connection to the SRD. What I did was I took the game I wanted to play, the game I remembered, and it helps to understand that it's the game. It is partly the game the way we played it, and partly the game the way I wish we'd played it back in the day. Things I changed because they were things I would have done differently back in the day if I'd known how. So, that's where it came from. The SRD connection was always somewhat tenuous. I just kind of had to say it, As time went on, people got less and less concerned. The OSR got bigger and bigger, and it became obvious that Wizards did not take any of us seriously. None of us were concerned to them, and that's reasonable because we're a tiny drop in the bucket of their revenues. So they didn't care anything about us. And it became fairly obvious. And the more people did OSR games, the more bold they became about how far they strayed from the SRD's terminology and how close they dared to come to the old games that they wrote, that they were mimicking or so forth. So that's kind of what the deal is because Basic Fantasy, depending on where you draw the line, Basic Fantasy is definitely one of the first. It might be the first OSR game, or it might not be, depending a lot on how you draw the line.
Yeah, actually, I was just about to ask that exactly, because I always assumed that Osric was the first. Something that you just said almost made me wonder if I had that wrong.
Well, okay, so that depends on where you draw the line. First of all, assuming you eliminate Castles and Crusades, because Castles and Crusades really wasn't trying to be a retro clone. They were trying to copy the feel, the old school feel of the game. They were definitely about rulings and about fiat. So they were definitely following along the old playbook, but they have a game with a core mechanic, which is something that I deny that old school games should have. I don't believe a core mechanic is a good idea for an old school game. In fact, I'm really not sure it's a good idea for any game, but definitely for an old school fantasy RPG, I think that's a mistake. I just think it is. And it's opinion. You can disagree with me if you want to. Anybody listening is welcome to disagree with me on that, but that's my feeling on it. If you eliminate Castles and Crusades from it, then the in the running basically for first is Osric and Basic Fantasy. Basic Fantasy was released to the public in February of 2006. But it was sketchy. There was darn little of the game implemented. It was mostly headings. An awful lot of rules that you would consider necessary to actually call it a complete game were not there yet. That was release 6. The first 5 releases were shared personally with friends but weren't published publicly online. So release 6 was the first release I actually showed. I actually started it earlier than that, and the start was in fits and spurts, but things really got rolling in January and February, and then I put that first public release out. By the summer of 2006, around release 45, the game was complete enough that I both ran it and played in it at a small convention at Madison, Iowa. Marion, Iowa. I said that wrong. I'm confusing that with another town. Marion, Iowa, up in the Cedar Rapids area. One of our initial artists was a participant in that. He actually ran the game the very first time I played my game. He was the GM. That was pretty awesome. He had a bunch of 3D terrain. He was very artistic. He unfortunately passed away, I think, the very next year. He was battling cancer when I first met him. So, Steve Zeiser. But it was pretty awesome. At that point, Osric, I'm not sure when Osric was revealed to the public, but they didn't really put Osric out in the public eye until it was pretty much complete. And then the flip side of that question is some people want to count it from when the book was published in print, and Osric was in print before Basic Fantasy was, because we don't know what a deadline is. And apparently Stuart Marshall and Matt Finch did know what a deadline was. So they got theirs out in print before we did. So which one's first? I don't know. I think we both were. We were talking with each other somewhat, a little bit. We weren't looking at each other's papers, or at least I wasn't looking at theirs. But we were talking with each other. I had some conversations with Stuart Marshall about my approach early on before he was ready to go public. He contacted me and told me he was thinking about doing something, which I don't think was true. I think he was already working on it. But anyway, he was cagey about it. But we discussed it briefly, so that's kind of how it got started. And the question at first is, like I said, it's up for grabs.
Nice. So you already stole some of the things I was going to say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Because I was going to say, I heard you on a previous podcast few years ago, and you had said, that it doesn't emulate any particular edition, Basic Fantasy, that is. I agree. And I was going to say, but it does emulate the way we used to play with like a mismatch of different editions.
It's most of the mechanics. I still have the urge from the OGL days to not name anything, but they come from 1981. They come from BX. Most of the mechanics actually come from there. None of the text does. All of it has been rewritten or written from scratch. In many cases, we knew the rules we wanted so well we didn't even need to consider a reference. This is just the game we played. There are things that I changed. I separated race and class because I never liked race classes. Even back in 1982 when I first started playing, I did not like race classes. I thought, quite reasonably, I thought, why couldn't a halfling be a thief? Why couldn't a dwarf be a cleric? I didn't understand why those things were not available to them. And I get now they were trying to write a game that was quote-unquote aimed at kids. That's fine. That's where we started. And I used Ascending AC. I would have done that. I've said this many times. I would have done that in 1982 if I'd thought of it. Because I stink at looking stuff up on tables, and I stink at doing math in my head, and I can do addition way faster than I can do subtraction. I am math challenged. And everything I can do to take load off of me as a game master, I do. So Ascending AC was a natural choice for me.
Yeah, I think, I know I differ from a lot of OSR fans here, but I think Ascending AC makes sense to my brain. And I wouldn't even call myself math challenged. I'm an engineer by trade. My other job, the one that actually pays money instead of costs money. Anyway, yeah, and Ascending AC it's intuitive, and you have a new person. It's just so easy to explain. And when you look at it mathematically, because with descending armor class, what you're essentially doing is you're adding the opponent's armor class to your roll. It's weird. It's not my thing, but that's me. To each their own. I'm not going to judge people.
Well, and that's the main thing I can tell you, though, about it from a practical basis, ignoring any questions of purity or old schoolness. From a practical basis, Ascending AC has dramatically improved adoption rates. I think it's a lot of the success of Basic Fantasy is it accomplishes being old school, but has Ascending AC. Because far too many younger players are just not going to learn to deal with descending AC. And there's no helping it. The younger players outnumber the older players, and they're going to outnumber them more and more over time because we keep getting older and dying and stuff. So if I want the game to live on a practical basis, it needed to have Ascending AC, even if I hadn't preferred it.
So you said that the game came out in 2006, which means I was a latecomer to it because I don't think I encountered it probably until like 2010 or so would be my guess. And when I first encountered it, just looking at the name, I was like, oh, this is going to be someone's recreation of Chaosium's basic role playing.
I've gotten that more than once.
Yeah, I said I'm not interested in that, and so I ignored it for a few years until I found it. And of course, I don't keep a diary, so I don't know when I found it. But I did look at Amazon when I bought the printed copy. The first one I bought several as gifts since then, but was 2013. So it was probably a year or two before that I found it on the web and looked at it and said, "Oh, I know what this is now." So how did you get the name Basic Fantasy? I have a theory, but how did you come up with the name?
It seemed obvious.
All right.
It's not the most imaginative thing, but I felt like, I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize. All you guys writing OSR games, I'm going to apologize for this right now. It's going to offend you. I didn't want an and sign in it. I didn't want to make it this and that. I didn't want to go the same way. And everybody who did that, I'm not saying what you did was wrong, but it wasn't right for me. I wanted a game that had a more direct name, and I was trying to emphasize what it was. I mean, it's basic. The slogan that we used during the first edition was "Make Mine Basic." That's a lot of the logo art out there that I shared was that "Make Mine Basic" was what it said. Each edition has had its own slogan that kind of came upon it while it was being developed. The second edition was "Adventure Lurks Within." The third edition is "The Old School is Now in Session." And the fourth edition didn't really exactly have one. I've kind of used the old ones over and over with it here and there. There is a logo that was going around, "Basic and Free Forever." I did not create that slogan, but it worked really well. It was published with Barkling artwork and the fourth edition logo. But yeah, that's, it just seemed obvious.
So, seeing that we're talking about editions,
So now you got to tell me,
oh,
what was your theory?
my theory was so while it is a mishmash of editions, it doesn't feel as much like AD&D as it feels like basic D&D.
Okay,
Uh,
your theory is not wrong. That's
um,
probably why it seemed obvious to me at the time.
Although I am a person that rails against the name basic D&D because I'm like, there is no such game. It's Dungeons and Dragons or Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. The set was the basic set, but that's my own soapbox, and it's a losing battle.
Hmm.
Yeah, but so we were talking about versions,
Yeah.
and that's the other reason why I wanted to have you here, because while we're talking about the comment, you said, you have a new version. I was like, I didn't know this because, like I said, I bought the book back in 2013, so I really stopped, checking out the website all the time. So tell us about the new version.
Okay, so the fourth edition is a direct result of the OGL debacle. Now, there's a word you don't get to use every day, debacle, but nothing fits as well in terms of clean words. I can think of several not clean things to use to describe it. Basically, they screwed themselves over. And it debacle really just works. But the whole OGL thing hit. I was just actually went back and was listening to a podcast the interview that I did just when I was putting out the Iron Falcon new releases around Christmas of 2022. And I had all these plans and all this stuff I was going to do, and I was talking about where I was going. And then January of 23 hit, and everything changed. And the people just appeared. I put out a call to remove the SRD so we could relicense the book, put it under Creative Commons. I'd come to the conclusion that we could do that in a fashion that would probably be legal and safe to do, but we had to, in public, in plain view, on our forum in a thread, we needed to identify every piece of SRD text and excise it. Hadrian Riel Salvatore, and I believe I'm pronouncing that right this time, appeared out of nowhere, took over the project of the SRD identification, guided it, got other volunteers working with them. They broke the job up into pieces that were manageable, and they hammered it out in about a month. And it was all I could do to keep up with it, to edit the ongoing text, to keep, to make the changes of the things that needed to be changed, to get a fourth edition out. There should never have been a fourth edition. There was never supposed to be a fourth edition.
So I had assumed, and it sounds like I'm very wrong then, I had assumed that you had taken the D&D 5th edition SRD under the Creative Commons license and used that text to replace the SRD text that you had
Nope.
before. But it
Nope.
sounds like that could have been, because
it is entirely original work.
A clean room implementation, as we would say.
Well, as clean as we. I mean, it's not really clean room, but it's as clean as we could make it. We clearly identified on our forum in this massive thread for SRD removal. We identified every piece of text that could be verified as being exact from the SRD, and we went back and rewrote everything that had to be rewritten, everything that needed to be changed. Some of it became less concise. That's unavoidable, I think, but it worked around it. And simultaneous with that, initially, before they did the Creative Commons license for the 5th edition SRD, we were under the impression that we were going to have to rename some of the monsters we already had. We were concerned that their names might be considered artistic presentation and that they might need to be rewritten. And my understanding of what that entailed evolved over a couple of months while the rewriting was being done. So initially we had renamed several of the monsters and actually reskinned some of them. That's where the Barklings came from. People ask me occasionally why we have Barklings or where they came from or whatever. We did not think we were going to be able to keep the kobolds. The name we could keep because that is an antique name. That is a monster name that goes way back into European folklore, and there was no reason we couldn't have it. We were concerned that the description of them, their physical description, would qualify as artistic presentation, and we were reskinning them as little dog men instead of as little dog-headed lizard men, lizard creatures. But then, as our understanding of the situation evolved, we realized that we could keep the kobolds the way they were. And incidentally, Gabe Fua's artwork for the Barklings was just too damn cute. Nobody wanted to kill kobolds if they were that cute. And so I kept them under the name Barkling. I restored the physical description of I rewrote it, obviously, but I restored the physical description of the kobolds to more or less what you'd expect them to look like. People said, are they related? Some people said, yeah, I think they are. Some people said, no, I don't think they are. So literally in the text it says, both races are aware that people think they're related to the other race, and they are offended by the question. The game doesn't answer the question, are they actually related or not? It simply says that both groups are offended by the question.
I like answers like that anyway, because it gives the GM license to do what he will in his world without some player saying, but the book says.
That's one of the things that's hard for people who are contributing to the project to remember, is not to nail things down too firmly. The person creating a new monster to go in one of our field guides may have a real clear vision in his or her or their mind as to what they're trying to create, and they may nail too much down to make it fully usable for other campaigns. And we go through and we try to identify those things, and we discuss them, and we make modifications. The point being that when we get done, the original author should still be able to recognize their work and should be able to run them the way they have been without problems, without necessarily forcing other people to run that creature exactly the same way.
Nice.
I mean, that was my goal, so we try to carry that through.
So when you're going through all this, do you have legal assistants to guide you through the licensing line?
I had unofficial legal assistance from a couple of sources. It would have been expensive to get a proper legal opinion. The primary reason why I relaxed my stance on things like renaming had to do with the 5th edition SRD. It was clear to me that if they weren't protecting the things that were in that SRD any more than I was, that I could probably get away, as I say get away, not that I think that I'm committing a crime, but just that it would probably be acceptable for me to use the things the same way. I am also giving them away under the same basic license. I'm not crediting them because I didn't use any of their text. And I don't believe that I have to. But I believe it would be difficult for them to go into court and say, he stole our work and it's cost us X number of dollars, when they're already giving it away. Anything that we created something like that they're already giving away, we can give away. I mean, I don't see a reason why that's going to be a problem for anybody. We're definitely not hitting their bottom line. Not on that basis, anyway. Not the basis of taking their stuff and making money off of it. And if all things came down to the worst possible situation and they actually were to send me a letter telling me that I had done something wrong, I could simply go back and paste that extra licensing on from the 5th edition SRD. It wouldn't really change anything because their license is a little different. They've chosen a different flavor of it than I did. But it's Creative Commons. It wouldn't present a problem for me to do that. But as long as I don't have to, I'm not going to. And I don't think they'd have a leg to stand on if they did want to tell me I had to.
Which flavor of Creative Commons did you go with?
Attribution share alike. I am a strong believer in sharing. And I figure if I shared my work with you and all the people that contributed to my project shared my work with you, the least I can expect is if you proceed to publish something based on our work, you will do the same thing we did. People tell me, oh, that's not unfair. Bullpucky. We're giving it away to you and allowing you to use it. And I don't see me and you in the personal sense, but you in the generic sense. Is somebody comes along, anybody comes along and wants to use our work, and do that. As long as they comply with the license. The fact that we require them to share it under the same license we do, we're just requiring them to be good participants in our community.
And what a beautiful segue. So Basic Fantasy is great. It's in my top 3 or 4, definitely, of old school games. But besides being a great product, it has a great community. How did you get that community?
On one basis, I would tell you I built that community from scratch. On another basis, I would tell you I didn't. I stole it. But the game was first released on Dragon's Foot. I was a Dragon's Foot participant since probably 2001 or so. I forget exactly when I started in with them. It was in the forums of Dragon's Foot. It was in their publication process where they published fan-created stuff that couldn't be sold because they knew they didn't have a license to do it at the time. Where I learned to do the editing, the layout, where I learned how to run this kind of a project in the first place. And when I started releasing Basic Fantasy at first on Dragon's Foot, I collected participants from the Dragon's Foot members. Many people participated early on. Their names are credited in the book, who haven't been in the project in years because at the time that they did, we were the only game, so to speak, in town. And if they wanted to participate in the development of a game, they pretty much had to do it with us. Time went on, there's a lot more games out there, and a lot of those people have moved on to other games, and that's perfectly fine. But their contributions are still here, still benefiting the community. So
Nice.
I built it from scratch. I shared. One thing that people don't understand, if you want people to do work on a collaborative project, you have to start by sharing something. You can't tell people, I think we need this. They're going to say, yeah, we do need this, but no one's going to work on it. But if you create something and you share it and you tell people that you are interested in their feedback and you're interested in their contributions, they will start to show up and contribute. And the more respect you show those people and the more of their work that you use and appreciate, the more you're going to get that. You're going to have the people come. And it's a little tricky sometimes to ride herd on these people. That sounds bad. It's really like herding cats, to be honest, because they all have something that they want, and they don't always want the same thing as everybody else. And so I had to set rules, I had to set boundaries, and say this is how we're going to do things and so forth. And not everybody does things exactly the same way, but we've made it work. I have always seemed to have at least a few people creating stuff on the forum. Sometimes there's a lot going on right now. I always tell people, if you're a Basic Fantasy fan and you're not on the forum, you don't know what's going on, because there's so much happening there. There's so much material there. I see you covering your eyes over there, but there's so much material out there. There's no reason not to hang out occasionally just to see what we're up to. We've got 170 page adventure series that is working its way through final production. Terror and Tosas, pronunciation is biting me today, by Leon Atkinson. Todd Lyon's first adventure, he's the and I know I'm not pronouncing this the way he does. Chris Gonnerman is his book, but I have not pronounced that the way he pronounces it. His first adventure, Beneath the Spire, I believe is the name of it. It's closing in on final publication rather rapidly. Got a nice cover for it, lined up and everything. Those are going to be out in the next few months in print. So I'm looking forward to that. There's just a lot going on. We have projects that need attention that we simply don't have the time for right now, that we will definitely get back to at some point.
Nice. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit now.
Sure.
Because I said it's like in the top 3 or 4, because Basic Fantasy, in my mind, everyone has their own preferences, is actually beaten by Iron Falcon. I like Iron Falcon better.
That's fine. I'm not going to bitch about that.
And so, well, for those who don't know about Iron Falcon, rather than me saying whatever and getting it wrong, why don't you tell them what Iron Falcon is? Because it does not seem to have as much love as Basic Fantasy.
It doesn't. Iron Falcon is my spite project. Back in 2015, I was told by some people, one person in particular on my forum, that Basic Fantasy was not listed as a Retroclone on Wikipedia. And I'm like, no, really? And I went and looked, and it wasn't. Basic Fantasy had been ejected. When Basic Fantasy and Osric and Labyrinth Lord and Swords and Wizardry all came out around 2007 or so, we were it. We were the entire OSR. There weren't other games at that point. There was probably a lot of stuff being developed, but we were it. We were the only ones around there for quite a while. We were the OSR in terms of game systems. And we invented Retroclone. We invented the idea of cloning old games. And Wikipedia editors moved the goalposts so that Basic Fantasy, because it didn't emulate a specific edition to a arbitrarily high level of accuracy, decided it wasn't a Retroclone anymore. It was OSR, but it wasn't a Retroclone, while the other 3 were still listed as Retroclones, because you could name, if you were not bound by the OGL, you could name the editions that they were cloning. This made me cross. I took a look around to see what hadn't been cloned. And I came to the conclusion that as I had to say at the time, the first release version, first edition of the world's most popular role-playing game with its first supplement had never been cloned. This is the earliest version of D&D that was recognizably D&D, the way we recognize the game. I got a whole video about what makes Zero E different, where I explain what I learned, because I could never get it. I could never get anybody to explain it to me. The old grognards would talk about how the thief ruined the game and so forth and so on, and they never explained why. But while developing Iron Falcon, I was talking with Simon Bull, who is one of the authors of Delving Deeper. I recommend Delving Deeper if you want that original Zero E feel. I think it's a fantastic game for the type. I don't want to play it because once I understood what that first game was really like, I get why they say it's different, but I don't think I enjoy it. But all this goes around in circles. I created Iron Falcon because I was irritated. I was no longer a Retroclone author, and because they'd moved the goalposts on me. So I reproduced that game just as close as I felt I legally could do, just as close as I could. I mean, excising, not using, I did use some SRD text. I kind of had to. I maintained the same approach to it I did with Basic Fantasy. Used the OGL, but I cloned those mechanics just as close as I could. I had a lot of advice from Simon and from a number of Zero E fans. One told me that I had absolutely and completely failed, and I was should be ashamed of myself because I allowed player character half elves to be clerics because the original game didn't. Of all the things I changed, of all the things I had to change, and that was the one I didn't actually have to change that, but I changed it because I didn't see the point. Why not let player character half elves be a cleric? They had a level limit. It was not like it was going to be too easy on them. But anyway, that was what it was. I wrote it in a month. I wrote Iron Falcon, the first print version of Iron Falcon, in just a little more than a month. It took a couple of weeks to get through the editing process, but the actual core writing was done in a month, in basically the month of February into March 15, and I put it out for sale. I loved writing it. I love what I learned writing it, putting it together, the things that I discovered that I didn't know about the old days, the history I had to absorb to create it, faithfully enough to suit me, if not the guy that didn't like my half-elves. But it really wasn't exactly the game I wanted to play. That was Basic Fantasy. I did see things when creating that game that I wish I had done in Basic Fantasy, but nothing that's really significant, nothing that would really matter to anybody, just stuff that I thought about, and I thought, I kind of wish I'd done that differently. I do wish I had done morale the way that it works in Iron Falcon. I think it really is superior to the 1981 mechanism, but that's just me. But yeah, that's how it happened. It was a spite project, and I created an adventure book to go with it because I felt like it needed it. It features an adventure by a late friend of mine, the Dungeon of Kairos, along with 3 other adventures, one of which I had some help with from another long-term contributor, Steve McKenzie. That was supposed to be it. That was supposed to be the end of it. I put it out there. I didn't really see that I would, even though I numbered Iron Falcon Adventures 1, I really didn't feel that I was going to write a second one. And that was the way it was up until that fateful December of 22 when I released Iron Falcon 75 and the Handbook of Monsters. So proud of those. I had all these plans going forward for that game, and then the OGL thing happened, the debacle, and it was terrible. Anyway, and I've wandered around your whole question in circles until I kind of went down the drain in the middle of it, so I don't know where we go from here.
Well, the thing was pretty much, what is Iron Falcon? I think you answered that question.
It's as close as you can get to that game. It's as close as you can get to playing the way you might have played in 1975, but probably nobody ever actually played it exactly that way because the game was so riddled with house rules and so misunderstood at the time.
You just mentioned, though, Iron Falcon 75. I don't know what that is. What?
Oh my God, you don't
Whereas
know
I know
what
Iron Falcon is. What is Iron Falcon 75?
Iron Falcon 75 is the result of a weird question that came to me when I was half asleep. What if the game wasn't the game rules as they were in 1975? What if the setting was 1975? This was before Stranger Things, okay? when I first came up with this idea. Stranger Things wasn't out yet, and I began to think about what would have happened if magic had been real, but something had happened and pushed it out of the world, and now it began to come back. What would happen if magic started to be real in the real world? And I thought about how to write that. I thought about how to contain it to limited areas. I came up with a lot of ideas. I started putting them together. I wrote an introductory adventure set in a hobby shop in a Midwestern town that happens to be a tourist attraction on a lake. And I'll leave it at that. The town's called Lakeside.
Oh,
The map might look familiar if you happen to be from the right area.
so for a while, I lived on the Illinois-Wisconsin border.
So
And
you might know what I'm talking about.
yeah, well, except when you said the lake, I was thinking Lake Michigan.
Yeah,
And I
no.
was like, are you talking about Friend's Hobby? But no. But yeah, the guy, Friend's Hobby was my local gaming store when I lived there. And the owner, Robert Bigelow was his name, but he was business partners with Gary Gygax on some project. I can't remember, whatever was coming out around 2000. So anyway, I was like, is it? No, I get what you're talking about now.
But that's the deal. The town is vaguely based on that map, but not in great detail, and rotated 90 degrees to suit my preferences. But I created this adventure where a group of players a group of people who used to play war games when they were teenagers. And then they all graduated from high school, and they went off in their own ways, and they all did different things. But somehow or another, they all ended up back in the town of Lakeside, wandered into that same hobby shop where they'd hung out when they were younger, and found Uncle Frank, the uncle to one of the player characters, was happy to see them, and was more than happy to start the games up. And he had something he wanted to show them. They come for the second game session, and he says, "Hang on, I'll be right back." And he goes down in the basement, and he never comes back. They try to go outside, and there's a mist surrounding the hobby shop, and they can't leave. They have to literally descend into a dungeon that has just literally magically appeared under the basement. They have to descend into a dungeon to rescue Uncle Frank from the goblins, using only weapons and equipment that they can find within the hobby shop. I started running it at conventions, and I did it this way. I gave them stereotypical kids. You want to be the brainy kid, you want to be the fat kid, you want to be the poor kid, you want to be the weird kid. If I had more players, I also had the visiting kid and the popular kid, all of whom had, as kids, been in the hobby shop playing war games, and then they'd, again, grown up and done different things, and then come back. The fat kid grows up to be a jock, but I don't tell them this. I just tell them the kids. Everybody thinks Goonies. They think they're going to be doing a Goonies adventure playing as kids, and then I give them this slip of paper that tells them about their history, how the fat kid grew up and got slim and became a football player and a jock and so forth, how the brainy kid became an accountant, and the poor kid ended up in jail, and the weird kid became a priest. And they all end up back in Lakeside and as friends, and now they have to go forward and save Uncle Frank and so forth, and then deal with various magical things that happen. The event, I won't go into too much detail about what it is, but the event that releases the dungeon in the hobby shop also creates an area of magic in the downtown where magic things can happen. And it turns out some people have magical heritages. Whatever it was that pushed away magic changed any creature that was close enough to human into human. So the nice ladies at the Greek restaurant are descended from a Medusa. And the volunteer firefighter, one of them, and his daughter are minotaurs.
Nice.
And at some point or another, they transform, and they, confused and possibly turned evil and so forth, they start rampaging. Getting them out of the area restores them. Iron Falcon 95 is a blast to run. It's the most immersive game I've ever run. Players don't know anything about medieval peasants, but they know about the guy that runs the five and dime store. These are experiences, even though 75 is a long time ago for some people, before many players were born. It's still set in a world that they recognize, and that combined with the way that I describe in the game setup, introducing them to NPCs, causes them to think of the NPCs more as people and less as pieces to be knocked over. Nice. And it is one of the most entertaining games I think I've run. Wish I could run a more consistent campaign of it, but my in-person players and my online players are both too attached to my basic fantasy campaigns.
So
But we did run quite a bit of playtesting.
yeah, our frequent co-host James, in fact, the one that was on the review of Equipment Emporium, that sounds right up his alley, actually. So I am definitely going to tell him about it.
Now, if you're a fan of Iron Falcon, whether or not you want to play Iron Falcon 75, you really need to check out the Handbook of Monsters. I found in writing the adventures for Iron Falcon Adventures 1 and then beginning to work on Iron Falcon 75, there are a lot of monsters that we think have always been there that had not been invented yet in 1975. Or if they had, they hadn't been written down. Shriekers. That was the first one that I ran into. I went to put some Shriekers into a dungeon, and I looked in the Iron Falcon book, and there are no Shriekers in there because it follows the coverage of the original game, and it covers the monsters you need to play that game. So I sat down during the Iron Falcon 75 development, and I made myself a list of everything I would need to run any adventure that was written prior to about 83. Or any edition of the game, and I put them all together in one book. And that's the Iron Falcon Handbook of Monsters. It is given with statistics for the classic game with descending AC and so forth. It is compatible with basically anything from that era. You may have to adjust the armor class, but basically everything else should just work. So whatever you're running, if you need a monster of a specific type, where the monsters were ones I was confident I couldn't use directly, of course, just like everybody does, I provided replacements, work-alike monsters to fill the same dungeon ecological niches that are required, but everything's in there. The only real add-ons, we added red caps. The one contribution I took from another contributor, R. Kevin Smoot, one of the long-term supporters of Basic Fantasy, submitted those. And I had Alexander Cook doing my artwork, and he does the nicest mushroom men, so I had to have them. But other than that, the game is the Handbook of Monsters is just the monsters you need to play old school. It doesn't produce a lot of novelty. You don't get a lot of new stuff. It's not new stuff. It's
that's
stuff.
not the point. Yeah.
No, the point is to make sure that if you're running Delving Deeper or Iron Falcon or Basic Fantasy, it'll work there. Or Origin Wizardry, it'll plug right in.
I do have the Basic Fantasy field book. But now I see that there's more than one.
There's 2 field guides now, and there's a field guide omnibus edition being assembled. It's going to be years before the omnibus comes out, but it will be entirely Creative Commons.
Nice. That leads into the next question I was going to ask you. Is Iron Falcon going to get the Creative Commons treatment?
It's actually there.
Oh.
That's why I'm able to be more liberal about how I describe it. There is the ODT and PDF versions on the website and on the forum where we do the development work. For the Creative Commons version, I need a little filler art, and I'm kind of dragging my feet working on it because I got so much stuff going on. But whenever I get my ducks in a row, I will put that together and get that out in print. And the SRD I get the same team, the same leader, Hadrian, took over running that also, and he did the SRD removal, guided that for both the core rules and the Handbook of Monsters. So I've got the core rules done. I've got to start on the handbook, but I've got everything in the forum. He's given me the list. I've got everything I need to fix, everything I need to find and correct to make it legal. And then since that's basically, those books are all almost entirely my work. I don't have to worry about getting licensing from anybody else in order to change the license agreement from anybody else to change the licensing. So once I get that cleaned up, I get the license changed, I can get that in print.
Nice.
I'm looking forward to having that done, but at the same time, it's not my highest priority right now. Basic Fantasy has way more users, way more players, way more people that want to use it. I love Iron Falcon for what it is, but Basic Fantasy is where the activity is right now. So,
well, that was everything I had planned. I guess the magic question is, do you have anything besides Basic Fantasy and Iron Falcon, other things that I just don't know about?
There are no other games in print, in publication at all right now. I have a project I've worked on off and on forever, since college. That was a long time ago, called Realms of Wonder. Realms of Wonder is more about its setting than it is about its rules, and it is perpetually stalled because I can't nail the rules down. That's the tricky part about this. Iron Falcon and Basic Fantasy were both easy to write because I knew what rules needed to be in them. For Realms of Wonder, I don't. I've got 2 different science fiction games that are stalled. Galactic Encounters will probably never be done. One first reason is because I'm the only one who has the vision I have for it, and number 2, it's too big. It would require something the scale of Traveler to work, and without taking their content, I just don't have enough. There's just not enough material. I don't even know how they built it that big, but they had years to do it. So I don't think either of those is liable, or you don't think that game is liable to go anywhere. I have a game called Space Corps, formerly called Space Force before Trump messed it up by naming an actual Space Force. That is an alternate history game. Space Corps is set in 1969 in a universe where we got to Mars in the 1940s.
Nice.
And acquired technology left behind by the Martians when they left their dying planet. I love running that game, but it's not nearly ready for prime time. So those are things I've got worked on. Now, one thing you can get right now is the RPG Primer and Old School Playbook. I've had that out for several years. I put a new edition out a couple of years ago. It is intended as a guide for new players. It's intended to, in the briefest possible fashion, apparently because it's a thin book, but it's intended to guide people through the process of learning to play an old school game and even possibly game mastering. I cover in a simplified fashion all of the processes of playing the game, of creating adventures and running them. I'm told there's good advice in there. I've had several people tell me that they hand them out frequently to friends who think they'd like to get involved but are daunted by the difficulty of learning. I know that some people are concerned about looking like fools or whatever. I mean, come on, we're all crazy here. But yeah, the RPG Primer does include towards the end conversion notes for several old school games for adapting materials between them. That's about the only thing that would probably be even remotely useful to an experienced game master. But they're awful nice people to hand to people.
Nice.
It's that intro that used to be in all the games, but expanded.
In my mind, I keep thinking I have read this, but I don't know if I'm confused it with some other primer. So I don't know.
I created mine in response to there's the book.
Yeah, I don't own that.
Okay. In response to primers written by a couple of other people, I tried to be a little more comprehensive. The other primer materials that I looked at were really almost like more advertising for playing old school than they were explaining how to do it. And I don't mean that as a dig at any of those other primers. They're good for what they were for, but I wanted something a little different, and that's what I created the RPG Primer for.
Excellent.
So yeah, that's about all I got out there.
Was there any other products that you wanted to tell us about?
Okay, I got 2 things I want to tell you about. As far as new products go, like I mentioned, we've got a couple of adventure books coming out soon. Actually, there's 3. Besides Beneath the Spire from Todd Lyons and Terror in Tosas by Leon Atkinson, Stephen Pogue's Endless Tunnels of Enlandon, classic adventure published on Dragon's Foot originally. He gave me permission some time ago to adapt and relicense it so that it could be released as a basic fantasy product, and it is closing in on final publication also. Not as quickly as the other 2, but it's definitely on track. I'm looking forward to getting it out this year. I have begun the process of releasing more things on DriveThru RPG. Now, I don't know if you know, but we've always published on Lulu and for a long time on Amazon. DriveThru RPG has not been a big seller for us for getting the books out there, and their publication process is just more complicated and slower than either of the other 2 platforms. And as a consequence, I really never got anything out there besides basically the rules. But I've begun the process of getting adventure books out there. I'm hoping within the next month and a half that the 4 introductory adventure books, BF1 Morgansfort, JN1 The Chaotic Caves, the DC1 Tales of the Laughing Dragon, and KH1 The Black Apple Brew. I am hoping to have all of those available on DriveThru for people that want to buy from them. DriveThru's print editions are probably a little nicer than the other platforms. They're definitely thicker.
Wow.
You can stack. I've got on my shelf over here. I've got fourth edition from all 3 vendors, and the Amazon book is the thinnest. and the drive-through book is the thickest. And you can definitely see the difference and feel the difference handling them. And that's true both for the hardbacks and the paperbacks. That's something I'm working on getting done. They have a process where I have to buy a proof from them before I can activate it, and I won't pay night shipping for these proofs because we don't make money off these books in the first place. It gets expensive to do that, so I don't pay for the fast shipping. So it's 3 to 6 weeks between me ordering proofs and them finally arriving. Once I get proofs and they look good and I activate them, I'll get the activation done and people will be able to buy them off drive-through. The other thing that I want to talk about, and I know you saw my shirt, a Falcon shirt.
Yep.
We have a event coming up Labor Day weekend. Falcon in Quincy, Illinois is one of 2 conventions that regularly happens in Quincy, Illinois. The small local conventions normally, although the other one, QuinCon, it gets pretty good turnout every year. FallCon has always had kind of a low turnout, but this year they've moved it back to Labor Day weekend and combined it with the Great River Film Festival. And the whole event is supposed to run from August 29th, which is a Thursday, through September 1st, which is a Sunday. On the 30th and the 31st, Friday and Saturday of FallCon in August, we're going to run the Basic Fantasy Adventure Binge. Okay. Now, this is an event for 30 people, maximum. The people who sign up to participate in the binge should sign up for both days. If they can't make both days, they should try to at least make the Saturday because that'll wrap it up. It's a 4-part adventure. Volunteer game masters will run some of the parts, but everybody who participates will have at least one opportunity to sit at my table and play, the game with me. I had a bunch of people tell me they wanted to come and sit at my table and play Basic Fantasy, so I came up with a way that people can do it. We have people coming distances that I don't think I even would have believed planning to come. I know that several people who are regular project members, including one of our editors, plans to show up. I've never met my editors before, so I look forward to that. And as I said, we're going to have volunteer GMs that are going to fill in. We're going to have a rotating arrangement. There will be 30 pre-generated characters, so everybody will have their own character. And the way that's designed, each adventure segment will have a beginning part that explains where they should have gotten to. If the particular table they sat at for the previous session didn't make it all the way through their session, it'll tell them where they should have ended up. It won't give away anything to the volunteer GM that he or she would benefit from if they play in a subsequent session, because they will be players part of the time and GMs part of the time. Everybody gets to sit at my table and play at least once. That's the whole plan. Depending on how many people we get and how many volunteer GMs we have, the more volunteer GMs, obviously, the less sessions they'll have to GM. It's going to be a challenge for the GMs because they will have like half an hour to review the materials for their segment before they can have to sit down and run it. I am making efforts to make it possible for them to understand the material they need quickly enough. It's a pretty basic adventure for what it is. The object is not to present something groundbreaking or complicated, but an opportunity for a bunch of us fans to get together and play the game. And that's kind of where we're going with this. So the registrations for the Adventure Binge, for the registrations for FallCon are beginning to be activated. I will have the Adventure Binge registrations activated probably before you go live with your podcast. So by now, if you're listening to this, you probably can go to the Falcon site. I am going to do a video where I explain this in more detail. I'll put it out on YouTube, and everybody needs just to check for the Facebook group or the forum for the link, and I'll have that out there so people can get more details on it. There will be a packet for the volunteer GMs that I'll send out in advance to them as a PDF to give them information about some. There's a hex crawl section that we don't really have good written rules for, and I have written stuff they're going to need to know if they run that session, so I'm going to give them that. Hex crawl, 2 different dungeons, time limit, a lot of interesting stuff going on there.
That sounds awesome.
I plan to be at QuinCon this year. I usually run 2 sessions at QuinCon, one in the evening on Friday and one in the morning on Saturday, and I don't have the dates for QuinCon in front of me, but it's in July, mid-July, and I will just be running regular sessions there. But the Adventure Binge, I'm hoping it's going to be a big deal. It's set up so I can scale it from 4 players all the way up to 30, and I already know I'm going to have at least 4 participants because I've had that many people that I know tell me that they're going to be there. So
nice.
I think that covers it.
Yeah, I'm done with everything, and we're about at that time anyway. So I would like to thank you for being here with me.
It was a
And
pleasure.
I would like to say that if anybody wants to check you out, they should go to
Well, basicfantasy.org, of course, our website. Iron Falcon has ironfalconrpg.com, but there's on the Basic Fantasy forums, there's a section for Iron Falcon also. So that's where you'd want to go. We have a Discord. It's linked from the homepage at basicfantasy.org. So it's all accessible from there. Go to basicfantasy.org, follow the links.
and I will put links to everything I have in the show notes. Thanks very much for joining me.
All right. Thank you.
And everyone else, thanks for listening this week. And if you have feedback, of course, feedback at decahedron.com. And until next time, happy gaming, happy life. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Decahedron RPG podcast. Please come back again to the Decahedron RPG podcast.